I never imagined that betrayal could strike so sharply in the city I called home. It was early morning in New York, and the streets below were alive with cars, taxis, and hurried footsteps. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers, yet the warmth could not reach the cold pit in my stomach. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I saw the subject line of the email. Immediate action required, ownership transfer. I froze, my hands shook. Who would dare touch my company? Then the truth hit me like a wave I had not anticipated. It had to be him, Matthew, my ex-husband. I am Samantha Blake, 33, and I have spent most of my adult life building the company that is my pride and my future. Every late night, every sleepless week, every sacrifice was mine. And now, someone I once loved and trusted was attempting to take it away. Matthew Blake, my husband. 34, charming, calculated, and dangerous when he wanted to be. He was tall, always impeccably dressed, and he had a way of making people believe in him. I married him when I was 27, believing that his brilliance and charm would match my ambition. At first it seemed perfect. Matthew and I shared many good days. We traveled across the country together, exploring cities, tasting new cuisines, and laughing at silly things that no one else would understand. On weekends, we would walk through the parks, hand in hand, talking about our dreams for the future. He would tell me that he believed in my vision, that he knew I could achieve anything I wanted. I believed in him too, blindly at times. Our life was filled with small rituals that mattered. Saturday mornings meant breakfast at our favorite cafe. Sunday afternoons meant long drives to the countryside, just the two of us talking about our hopes. There were quiet nights in our apartment when we shared secrets no one else would ever know. Those were the days I remember with a bitter longing now, the days when I believed that love could last forever. But slowly, cracks began to appear. Matthew became controlling, criticizing my decisions, insisting that his way was better. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was temporary. But then the arguments became frequent. He began to undermine me in front of friends, in business meetings, and even in moments that were supposed to be private. I started to notice the subtle manipulations, the lies that seemed harmless but were designed to make me doubt myself. Eventually, the good days became memories, distant and faint. The laughter faded, replaced by tension and resentment. I realized that I could not stay in a relationship where love had turned into manipulation, where trust had been replaced by control. I made the hardest decision of my life. I filed for divorce. Matthew became my ex-husband, but the wounds of betrayal ran deep. I had thought the divorce would bring closure, yet it only seemed to awaken something in him. A desire to claim what he believed was his. I hoped that separation would mean freedom, but the reality was far different. And now, as I read the email on my kitchen counter, I knew that the real battle was beginning. Matthew wanted more than just revenge. He wanted to take everything I had worked for. He did not realize that the woman he once tried to control had grown stronger. He did not know that I still held the keys to his downfall. The questions ran through my mind relentlessly. How did he gain access to my company? Was this just the beginning of his plan? Could I protect everything I had built without falling into his trap? I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to calm the storm inside me. The city outside continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the quiet war that had begun in my apartment. One thing was clear. I would not let Matthew succeed. I would make sure that he paid for every deceit, every attempt to manipulate, every betrayal he had inflicted upon me. The battle had just begun. And I was ready. The morning after I received Matthew's email, I could not sleep. My apartment felt smaller, more confining than it ever had before. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of the life I had shared with him, the life I had fought to leave behind. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring at the city below. The streets were crowded, but none of it mattered. My entire world had narrowed to one question: how far would he go to destroy me? I had not underestimated Matthew before, but even now, the full extent of his audacity shocked me. He had waited months after our divorce, quietly observing, calculating, planning his move. The fact that he had managed to initiate legal filings against my company showed that he had not lost his cunning touch. The thought made my blood boil, but it also sharpened my focus. I could not let anger rule me. I had to think strategically. I called David Reynolds immediately. David, I need a complete report on these filings. I want every document, every signature, every timeline he has created. I want to understand his plan before he thinks he has the advantage. David arrived within the hour. He had that calm, professional demeanor that made me trust him completely. He spread the files across my dining table. From what I see, Matthew is using a combination of loopholes and aggressive legal tactics. He is attempting to claim partial ownership based on outdated contracts and ambiguous clauses. It is deliberate. He wants to create confusion, to delay your decisions, and to intimidate you. I leaned over the table, examining each document. My mind raced. He had thought that by filing these claims, I would panic or make a mistake. He had thought that his past knowledge of my company would give him an edge. He had thought wrong. How fast can we respond? I asked, my voice steady but sharp. We can challenge the filings immediately, Davis said. But he is smart. He will anticipate our moves and try to counter them. You need to be prepared for a long and calculated battle. I nodded. I understood the challenge. This was not just about papers or signatures. This was about control, about power. Matthew wanted to prove that he still had influence over my life. He wanted to remind me of the man I had once trusted. I remembered the early months after our divorce. The relief I had felt at reclaiming my independence. The late nights when I worked alone in my office, planning growth strategies for the company. The freedom of making my own decisions without interference. That freedom was being threatened now, and I could not let it slip away. Matthew's first public move came a few days later. I arrived at my office to find whispers among my employees. They looked nervous, uncertain. Rumors had begun circulating about supposed ownership disputes and the possibility of a takeover. Matthew had not yet contacted them directly, but he had planted doubt. He was using people as weapons, as if questioning my authority could shake the foundation of my empire. I gathered the staff for a meeting. I am still in charge, I said firmly. Every decision, every project, every contract goes through me. Do not let anyone manipulate your perception. I will handle this. Trust me. Their eyes reflected a mixture of relief and worry. I could not blame them for questioning. Matthew had always been persuasive, and his charm had not disappeared with our divorce. But I needed their loyalty and focus. The company's success depended on it. That evening, I sat alone in my office reviewing strategies. My mind kept returning to the question, why was he doing this now? Was it purely financial, or was there something more personal driving his actions? The answer seemed clear. It was revenge. Matthew had never forgiven me for leaving him, for choosing independence over control. And now, he thought he could assert dominance in a way that would humiliate me publicly and privately. I clenched my fists. I would not allow humiliation. I would not allow fear. I would fight back, but I would do it methodically. Every move Matthew made would be anticipated. Every lie he planted would be uncovered. And in the end, justice would prevail. But even as I planned, I could not ignore the questions that gnawed at me. How far would he go to ruin me? Who else had he influenced to weaken my position? Could I counter every step without making a mistake? The uncertainty was frightening, yet it fueled my determination. That night, as the city lights glittered like distant stars, I made a silent promise. Matthew would pay for his betrayal. He would learn, the hard way, that underestimating me had been the gravest error of his life. And when the time came, I would not only protect what was mine but also ensure that justice would be served in the most absolute way possible. The following week was filled with tension that never seemed to end. I arrived at my office to find that the atmosphere had shifted. There was a subtle unease among the staff, whispers that stopped when I entered, uncertain glances exchanged across the room. Matthew had begun his attack in earnest. He had not yet stepped into my office, but his presence was everywhere. Contracts had been challenged, clients were being approached with rumors, and even suppliers had received letters questioning my authority. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm. Panic was the enemy. Strategy was my ally. I reviewed the filings again, analyzing every clause, every signature, every loophole Matthew had exploited. He thought he could confuse me with legal technicalities, but I had anticipated such moves. I was not the woman he had left behind. David Reynolds had become my closest ally during these days. He explained the implications of each document, showing me how Matthew was trying to corner me legally. "He is clever, Samantha," he said quietly, "but he is predictable. He wants to provoke mistakes. He wants you to react emotionally. Do not give him that satisfaction." I nodded, focusing on the files in front of me. Every paper, every signature, every line had to be scrutinized. Matthew had assumed that I would be rattled, that I would falter. He had not counted on my preparation, my attention to detail, and my refusal to allow fear to dominate me. The first direct confrontation came during a board meeting. Matthew had managed to have one of our clients, a small but influential partner, attend and raise questions about ownership rights. He was not there in person, of course, but his influence was palpable. The client asked pointed questions, challenging my authority in subtle ways. I stood firm. My voice was calm but firm. "All decisions regarding this company are under my control. Any questions about ownership or authority must be directed through my office. I am confident that everything is in proper order, and we will continue our operations without disruption." There were murmurs in the room, but I held their attention. My staff looked to me for guidance, and I gave it without hesitation. Matthew may have tried to cast doubt, but I refused to allow it. After the meeting, I retreated to my office, my mind racing. He was bold, but he was not flawless. Every attack he made left a trace, a pattern. I began to map it out, noting his preferred tactics, the types of people he targeted, and the timing of his moves. It became clear that Matthew was not acting randomly. Every step was calculated. That night I could not sleep. The city lights glimmered outside my window, a reminder that life went on even when chaos invaded my world. I made notes, drafted responses, and planned the next steps. Matthew had started this war, but I was determined to end it on my terms. I could not help but wonder what he was thinking. Did he believe that I would crumble under pressure? Did he imagine that I would plead or compromise? And more importantly, how far was he willing to go to achieve his goal? The questions kept me awake, but they also fueled my determination. The week ended with a small victory. One of the challenged contracts was nullified due to a technical error in the filing process. It was a minor win, but it reminded me that he could be outmaneuvered. I allowed myself a brief sense of satisfaction, knowing that this was only the beginning. Matthew's next move would come, and it would be more dangerous. I could feel it. The war had escalated beyond whispers and legal filings. He wanted more than control of the company. He wanted to prove something to me, to humiliate me, to remind me that he could still wield power in my life. I stared at my reflection in the office window. The woman looking back at me was no longer the same. Samantha Blake, who had once depended on him for love, guidance, and trust. She was stronger. She was calculating. And she was ready. The question that lingered in my mind, unspoken but pressing, was simple. How far would he go? And would I be ready for the storm he was about to unleash? The week after the small victory, I realized that Matthew was not slowing down. He had begun to use people around me as his tools. Whispers turned into messages, and messages turned into small acts meant to test my patience. It was subtle, but I noticed. Employees who once respected me now seemed hesitant. Some avoided my gaze. I knew immediately that he had reached out to them. He had found a way to plant doubt. One morning, I called in one of my senior managers, Karen. She had worked with me for over 5 years. I trusted her. Or at least I thought I did. Karen, I said calmly, is there anything I should know about client concerns or internal issues? Karen shifted uncomfortably. Well, Samantha, I received some emails questioning the ownership of the company. People are asking if the leadership is stable. I did not open all of them, but some seemed serious. My chest tightened. It was beginning. He had started his campaign of fear. But anger would not help me. I needed clarity, not confrontation. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I will handle it. Please continue your work and do not be influenced by rumors. Even as I spoke, I knew that this was only the start. Matthew's tactics were clever. He wanted to make me doubt my own team. He wanted to make me feel isolated. But I had faced challenges before. I could see through manipulation. Later that evening, I reviewed the emails that had been forwarded to me. Matthew had reached out to clients, suppliers, and even some employees, using lies and half-truths. He was trying to create chaos in my company. Every message was designed to provoke fear, hesitation, and mistakes. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. I would not panic. I would not allow his lies to control me. Every attack left traces, and every trace could be used against him. I began to plan, carefully noting which emails could be challenged legally, which contacts needed reassurance, and which moves I would make next. The emotional toll was heavier than the legal battles. It was one thing to fight on paper. It was another to watch people I trusted start to question me, to wonder if I was losing control, to see fear in the eyes of those who relied on me. Matthew knew this. That was his weapon. But he had underestimated my resolve. I remembered the nights before our divorce, when Matthew would criticize every decision I made, telling me I was too ambitious, too independent. I had left because I refused to be controlled, and now he was trying the same thing in a different way. But I had learned from the past. I would not be manipulated again. David Reynolds called late that night. Samantha, he said, we have identified the key points in these filings that can be challenged immediately. If we move fast, we can stop some of the pressure he is applying. I felt a flicker of hope. Even in the midst of chaos, there was a path forward. Good, I said. Prepare everything. I want to counter each step he takes. He will not succeed. As I hung up the phone, I stared out the window at the city below. The streets were alive with people going about their daily lives, unaware that a quiet war was raging in my office, in my company, in my life. One thing was clear. I could not allow him to win. And I would make sure that every move he made against me would be met with both strategy and justice. I woke up that morning with a sense of unease. Something in the air felt heavier, as if the city itself knew that trouble was coming. My phone rang before sunrise. It was David Reynolds. His voice, normally calm, carried a sharp urgency. Samantha, he said, Matthew has filed a temporary injunction against you. He is claiming that he has partial ownership of the company, and that all decisions must be frozen until the court rules. I felt a cold wave of disbelief and anger. An injunction? That was bold, almost reckless. It meant he wanted to stop me from acting entirely, to paralyze my company. He wanted me to feel powerless, trapped in the very life I had fought to build. How did he get this far? I asked, trying to control the rising panic. He knows the law. He is using every loophole he can find. He is not thinking about fairness. He is thinking about pressure and fear, David explained. But do not worry. We can fight this. We can challenge it, but we have to act fast. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was tense, but she was not defeated. I would not allow Matthew to control me again. I would respond with precision. Every move he made would be countered. Every tactic would be anticipated. I arrived at the office to find the employees whispering more urgently than before. There was fear in their eyes, confusion in their voices. Matthew's injunction had reached them before I could address it. I gathered everyone in the conference room. This injunction does not change anything, I said firmly. I am still in charge. I am still making decisions. Do not allow rumors to guide your actions. We will continue business as usual, and I will handle this situation legally. Trust me. They nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering. Matthew's influence was growing, and I knew he would not stop at legal filings. He would try to undermine me personally, emotionally, and professionally. Later that day, I discovered something that shook me. One of my closest employees, Tom, had secretly met with Matthew. He had shared internal company information, including some of my personal strategies for growth. The betrayal cut deep. Tom had been with me for years, and I had trusted him completely. I felt a wave of anger and hurt. How could someone I considered loyal side with Matthew? But I could not allow myself to lose focus. Anger was dangerous. Strategy was my weapon. I needed to turn this betrayal into advantage. I called David immediately. We need to address this breach. We need to make it clear that sharing internal information is illegal, and that it will have consequences. David agreed. Yes, Samantha. This can be used in our favor. It proves intent and manipulation. Matthew is crossing lines. We can hold him accountable. As I sat alone that night, reviewing every detail, I realized that the battle was no longer just about the company. It was about control, loyalty, and justice. Matthew wanted to prove he could dominate me. He wanted to humiliate me and show the world that I was weak. He had underestimated me again. I was not the same woman who had once depended on him. I had learned from every betrayal, every challenge, every moment of fear. I would fight, not just with documents and filings, but with careful planning and relentless determination. The morning after discovering Tom's betrayal, I knew that hesitation could cost me everything. Matthew had made his move, but I was ready to respond. Every action he had taken left traces. Every lie, every attempt to manipulate, could be turned against him. I would not fight blindly. I would fight strategically. I called David Reynolds early. We need a plan to counter every filing, every rumor, every manipulation Matthew is attempting. We cannot let him gain even an inch of control. David agreed immediately. Samantha, we can challenge the injunction. We can show evidence of manipulation and coercion. We can expose the lies he is spreading. But we have to move fast. I spent the day preparing. I reviewed every contract, every email, every interaction with clients and employees. I gathered evidence of Matthew's interference, documenting each betrayal. Tom's meetings with him were recorded. The attempts to influence clients and suppliers were noted. Every action became part of a pattern, a trail that could no longer be hidden. By late afternoon, I was ready to confront the staff. The whispers had grown louder. Fear had taken root. I called a meeting in the main conference room. I looked at their faces, each one reflecting doubt and worry. I know there are rumors and doubts. I began, my voice calm but firm. But I want you to understand one thing. I am in control. Every decision about this company is mine. No one can take that away from me. If anyone has been approached with false information, it must be reported immediately. We will handle this together. Karen, who has seemed uneasy before, stepped forward. Samantha, some of us were confused, but we trust you. We will support you. I nodded, grateful for the loyalty that remained. But I knew that loyalty was fragile. Matthew had planted seeds of doubt, and I had to uproot them carefully. That evening, I met with David in my office. "Every filing, every manipulation he is doing," I said, "we expose it. We turn it into proof that he is trying to deceive the system and harass me. We hit him where it hurts." David smiled slightly. "Yes, and once the court sees this evidence, it will not only stop him but also begin a legal path for consequences. This is the moment you can take control." For the first time in days, I felt a sense of power. Matthew had assumed he could destabilize me, that he could frighten me into making mistakes. He had misjudged me. Every act of betrayal he had committed had become my weapon. I started drafting a legal response, detailing every instance of his interference. I sent emails, prepared files, and created a timeline that no court could ignore. This was not just about winning the injunction. This was about holding him accountable. As I worked, I could not ignore the emotional storm inside me. Anger mixed with determination, hurt mixed with focus. Every memory of our marriage, the laughter, the betrayal, the heartbreak fueled my resolve. He had thought that leaving me powerless would be satisfying. He had underestimated my strength, my intelligence, and my patience. Late at night, as the city lights twinkled below my window, I allowed myself a small thought. The battle had begun, but I was already on the path to victory. Matthew's arrogance would be his downfall. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to control me would be exposed, and I would be there to ensure that he paid for it in ways he could not ignore. Matthew's next move arrived like a storm I had been bracing for. It was not a filing, not a rumor, not a subtle threat. This time it was personal. I received a letter at my apartment, hand-delivered, embossed with the company logo. My heart sank as I read the words. Asterisk, "Samantha, you will regret trying to block me. I know your weaknesses. I know the people you trust. I will take everything, and you cannot stop me." Asterisk. There was no signature, but I knew it was from him. The message was clear. He was no longer content to attack my company alone. He wanted to intimidate me directly. I called David immediately. "He is escalating. He is not just trying to control the company. He is trying to control me." "What do we do?" David's voice was calm but firm. "We document everything. Threats like this are illegal. We involve the authorities if necessary. You cannot respond emotionally. We respond strategically." I felt a mix of fear and anger. Fear for the safety of myself and my staff. Anger because Matthew thought he could scare me into submission. But I refused to give him that power. I would not show weakness. The next day at the office, I noticed subtle changes. Some employees looked over their shoulders. Others hesitated before speaking. The message had spread. Matthew wanted everyone to doubt me, to question my strength. I called a staff meeting, determined to take control. "I am aware that there have been threats," I said firmly. "I want you all to know that I am handling this legally and carefully. Do not let fear influence your work. Trust the process and trust me." Karen nodded, her expression resolute. "We will support you, Samantha." Her words gave me strength. But I knew loyalty could be tested again. Matthew would push, manipulate, and try to turn people against me. I had to anticipate his moves before he made them. That evening, I began mapping out a counterattack. Every legal filing, every manipulation, every threat became part of a strategy. Matthew had assumed he could scare me, that I would react emotionally. He had not counted on patience, preparation, or precision. I also decided to document the threats. Every message, every encounter, every suspicious email. If this escalated, I would have a record that could not be ignored by law enforcement or the courts. Late at night, I could not sleep. I stared out of my window at the city lights, thinking about the man who had once promised love and partnership, but had now become my adversary. How could someone so close turn into such a dangerous enemy? The question haunted me, but I knew one thing. I would not be intimidated. I would not falter. Matthew had crossed a line, and I was ready to respond in a way he could never anticipate. The battle was no longer just about the company. It was personal. It was emotional. And it was a fight for justice. The question remained, how far would he go before I struck back decisively? The days after Matthew's threat were tense and exhausting. Every phone call, every email, every minor delay in the company felt like a test. He wanted me to react with fear, to make mistakes, to show weakness. But I had a plan. He would not see the next moves coming. I spent hours reviewing every document, every email, and every contract he had ever touched. Patterns began to emerge. Matthew had always been meticulous, but in his arrogance, he had left traces evidence of manipulation, attempts to deceive, and connections with employees like Tom. These traces could be turned against him. I called David Reynolds. "We have the leverage we need," I said. "We can expose his manipulations legally, and we can make sure the court sees every detail. We turn his strength into his weakness." David nodded. "Exactly, Samantha. We can file motions showing intent, coercion, and interference. The more we document, the stronger our position." That evening, I began creating a detailed timeline. Every step Matthew had taken since our divorce, every email sent, every attempt to interfere with employees or clients, every threat, it all went into a single organized file. I wanted the court to see clearly what he was doing. There could be no doubt. I also reached out to Corinne and a few trusted employees. "We need your support. If Matthew has tried to influence you, or if he contacts you again, report it. Every detail matters." Karen looked nervous but determined. "We will do what is right, Samantha." Her words strengthened me. Loyalty was fragile, but it could be nurtured. I would rebuild trust and expose the lies. A few days later, I received an email from Matthew, carefully worded, pretending to sound reasonable. He claimed he wanted to discuss terms, to negotiate a fair resolution. I read it carefully, noting the language. It was a trap. He wanted me to appear desperate, to react emotionally. I smiled quietly. I would not fall into his trap. Instead, I used the email to gather more evidence. Every word he wrote, every suggestion, every demand became part of the case. Every interaction he attempted would work against him. I also began contacting clients who had been influenced by rumors. I reassured them personally, providing documentation, and showing them that my company's leadership and contracts were secure. Matthew's attempts to isolate me from clients and suppliers were failing. That night, I sat in my office, reviewing the timeline again. The patterns were clear. Every move Matthew made had been predictable once I knew his tendencies. His arrogance, his need for control, and his desire to intimidate had blinded him to the possibility that I could plan, anticipate, and act strategically. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The battle was turning in my favor. The war had escalated, but the tide was shifting. I was ready for the next phase, the moment where I could begin to corner Matthew, where his manipulations would unravel, and where justice would start to catch up with him. The questions that haunted me before, how far he will go, who else he had influenced, now felt like pieces of a puzzle I was solving. I knew the end game. I knew that every betrayal he committed would be exposed. And I knew that he would have no escape from the consequences of his actions. The storm he had tried to create around me was now collapsing, under the weight of truth, evidence, and strategy. And I was the one holding the control. It was clear that Matthew was growing desperate. The quiet attacks, the manipulations, the carefully worded threats had now turned into something bolder. One morning, I arrived at the office to find a message from our largest client, requesting an emergency meeting. My stomach tightened. I knew immediately who had prompted it. Matthew was trying to force a confrontation, to show that he could disrupt my operations directly. He wanted to create panic, to make me appear unstable. But I refused to give him the satisfaction. I prepared for the meeting with meticulous care. Every document, every contract, every email showing Matthew's interference was ready. I would not allow him to create chaos or doubt. When I entered the room, the client greeted me with cautious smiles. Their questions were pointed, subtle, testing my authority, probing for a weakness. I responded calmly, clearly, and decisively. Every answer reassured them that the company was under competent leadership, and that any claims by Matthew were false and legally baseless. After the meeting, I realized that Matthew had overreached. He had assumed fear would guide my actions, but his desperation had blinded him. Every move he made now was traceable. Every action could be countered legally. Back in my office, I began preparing my next steps. The evidence I had gathered over weeks, the emails, the threats, the staff manipulation was now ready to be presented. I could expose Matthew's patterns of harassment and coercion fully. That evening, David called. "Samantha, Matthew's desperation is showing. He is trying to force mistakes, but we have everything we need. We can file motions that will not only defend you but start a process where he may face serious consequences." I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Every betrayal, every lie, every threat had created a trail of evidence that could not be ignored. Matthew's overconfidence was now his weakness. Late that night, I reviewed the timeline again. It was a story of manipulation, interference, and coercion. Every attempt Matthew had made to destabilize me was now documented. I knew the moment was approaching when I could strike decisively, but even as I prepared, the emotional weight of the battle pressed on me. Betrayal, fear, and anger mingled with determination. Matthew had once been the man I loved, and now he was my adversary. That transformation was painful, but it fueled my resolve. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the storm he had tried to unleash was turning against him. The legal battle, the emotional strategy, and the evidence I had gathered were ready. Matthew's downfall was coming, and he would have no place to hide. The morning was heavy with anticipation. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, documenting every interaction, and carefully building a case that would leave Matthew with no room to maneuver. Today, I would make the first formal move. David Reynolds arrived early. "Everything is ready, Samantha. The filings are complete. Once we submit them, the court will see the full pattern of his interference and threats. This is the first step toward holding him accountable." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of determination and tension. My hands shook slightly as I reviewed the final documents. Every email, every threat, every attempt to manipulate employees and clients was there. Every lie Matthew had told was exposed in black and white. We submitted the filings. I felt a strange combination of relief and adrenaline. The trap was set. Matthew would be forced to respond, but now he would be responding under scrutiny, legally bound to answer for his actions. Within hours, the response came. Matthew had realized the severity of what I had done. His emails became frantic, desperate, and increasingly erratic. He was no longer the calm, calculated adversary he had been. He had been caught off guard by the clarity and strength of my case. I called David. "He is panicking," I said quietly, a faint smile on my lips. "This is exactly what we needed." "Every reaction is evidence," David agreed. "Yes, Samantha. His desperation will make him reckless, and that recklessness will strengthen our position even further." I spent the rest of the day meeting with my trusted employees, ensuring that everyone understood the legal boundaries. No one would act without documentation. Every interaction with Matthew had to be logged. His attempts to manipulate anyone would now only serve to strengthen the case against him. Late in the afternoon, I received a call from the law firm representing the clients Matthew had tried to influence. They confirmed that the evidence we submitted had cleared up all confusion. The clients had seen the truth. Matthew's efforts to isolate me were failing. I allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction. For the first time, I felt a tangible shift in control. Matthew was no longer dictating the pace of events. He was reacting to me. He was trapped in the structure I had created. As I looked out the window at the city below, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the betrayal, the threats, the attempts to destabilize me, to this moment where I held the upper hand, every step had been a lesson. Every challenge a preparation for the moment of justice. The storm Matthew had tried to create around me was now closing in on him. The pieces were in place. The court would see the truth. And when that happened, there would be no escape for him. Matthew's desperation became more apparent with each passing day. His emails grew longer, filled with frustration and threats disguised as reason. He tried to contact employees again, subtly implying consequences if they did not cooperate with him. Every action he took only confirmed the careful pattern I had documented. I called a meeting with David Reynolds and Karen to plan the next steps. He is trying to force mistakes, I said firmly. Every move he makes is predictable now. We document, we respond, and we let the law work for us. Karen nodded, her face serious. We are with you, Samantha. He will not intimidate us. The trust of my remaining team was crucial. Matthew had counted on fear and doubt to divide us. Instead, I had strengthened loyalty by showing transparency, fairness, and leadership. That loyalty became another weapon in my strategy. That week, Matthew attempted another bold move. He filed a motion to challenge some of the contracts I had signed, claiming they were invalid due to procedural irregularities. Court date was set, and he expected me to scramble, to appear unprepared. But I had anticipated this. I spent nights reviewing each contract in detail, preparing counter-arguments, and assembling proof of proper procedures. Every filing, every meeting, every email Matthew had sent to create doubt was now evidence against him. The court session arrived. Matthew appeared confident, but there was a subtle edge to his demeanor, anxiety he could not fully hide. I presented my case calmly, clearly, and decisively. Every piece of evidence, every documented manipulation, every threat was laid out before the judge. The judge listened carefully. Questions were asked. Matthew tried to explain his side, but his desperation made his words seem hollow, inconsistent, and even reckless. I could see the tension building in the courtroom. His plan to dominate and intimidate was unraveling before my eyes. After hours of testimony, the judge ruled in my favor. Matthew's motion was dismissed, and he was ordered to cease interference with my business immediately. The ruling sent a clear message. His manipulations had consequences. I left the courthouse feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief because my company and reputation were secure. Anticipation because this was only the beginning of the legal path that would ensure Matthew faced full accountability for his actions. That night, I sat in my office, reviewing the evidence one last time. Every step Matthew had taken, every betrayal, every attempt to undermine me, it was all documented, organized, and ready for the next stage. I realized then that the power had shifted completely. Matthew's desperation had blinded him, and my patience, strategy, and careful planning had positioned me to take full control. The storm he had tried to create around me was collapsing. By this point, I knew exactly how to corner Matthew. Every manipulation, every threat, every betrayal he had committed was documented and ready to be used. The final legal trap required precision, patience, and timing. I had learned over weeks that rushing would be dangerous. Strategy would win. David Reynolds and I worked late into the night, preparing the final motions. The filings would not only secure my company permanently, but also expose Matthew's harassment, intimidation, and attempts to unlawfully interfere with my business. Once submitted, the law would no longer protect his arrogance, it would punish it. "We submit this tomorrow," David said, his voice calm but firm. "Once it is in the court's hands, he cannot escape accountability." I nodded, feeling the weight of weeks of preparation. This was more than a legal battle. It was personal. Matthew had thought he could intimidate me, humiliate me, and take what I had built. He had underestimated me at every turn. The next morning, the filing was submitted. I felt a strange mixture of anticipation, anger, and satisfaction. I knew Matthew would react, but he would not anticipate the full scope of consequences. Every panic-driven action he had taken before would now work against him. True to form, Matthew's response came within hours. Emails, phone calls, frantic messages. He tried to negotiate, to twist the story, to threaten, but it was all documented. Every desperate attempt he made was now evidence of his coercion, manipulation, and intent to harass. I reviewed the responses with David. He is walking right into the trap, I said quietly. Every reaction, every attempt to manipulate others, every lie, it is all on record. The court date arrived. Matthew entered, appearing confident but visibly strained. His desperation was no longer subtle. Every question from the judge exposed cracks in his story. His lawyers struggled to defend the actions he had taken over the past months. I presented my case calmly, clearly, and decisively. Every act of intimidation, every attempt to control clients, every betrayal by employees he had orchestrated, all laid bare before the court. The judge's attention never wavered. Matthew's arrogance faltered with each piece of evidence. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was clear. Matthew was held accountable for his manipulations, harassment, and attempts to unlawfully interfere with my business. Restrictions were placed on him immediately, and legal consequences were set in motion. The trap had worked perfectly. I left the courthouse feeling an overwhelming mixture of relief and vindication. Weeks of careful planning, patience, and emotional control had led to this moment. Matthew had been outmaneuvered at every step, and the law now ensured he could not harm me or my company again. That night, I reflected on everything. The betrayal, the fear, the threats, they had all strengthened me. The storm Matthew had tried to create had collapsed, leaving him exposed and powerless. Justice had been served, not through revenge born of anger, but through strategy, evidence, and patience. The day Matthew finally faced the consequences felt surreal. The courtroom was quiet, but the tension was thick. He sat there, fidgeting, no longer the confident, controlling man I had once known. The arrogance was gone, replaced with a mixture of fear, regret, and disbelief. The judge reviewed the documentation I and David had prepared. Every email, every threat, every manipulation was presented with clarity. Witnesses testified about his interference, loyal employees, clients, and even Tom, whose betrayal had backfired completely. Matthew tried to speak, to explain, to minimize his actions, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge listened patiently, then delivered a statement that made my heart race. Matthew Harris, the judge said, your actions over the past months constitute harassment, unlawful interference, and repeated attempts to manipulate and intimidate your former spouse. The court finds these actions intentional and malicious. I watched as his face paled. I could see the realization hitting him that he had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated the consequences of his actions. Effective immediately, the judge continued, you are prohibited from contacting Samantha Reynolds directly or indirectly. Further, legal proceedings will continue to address damages caused by your actions, which may include imprisonment if violations occur. Matthew sat silently, broken. I could feel a strange calm wash over me. The storm he had tried to create around me was gone. Every betrayal, every threat, every attempt to undermine me had now been turned into his downfall. After the hearing, I returned to my office, exhausted but resolute. The team gathered around me, offering congratulations and support. I realized that this was more than just a personal victory. It was a reaffirmation of everything I had built, everything I had protected, and everything I had fought for. David Reynolds met me quietly. Samantha, this is only the beginning. The legal system will now ensure that he is fully held accountable. You have done everything perfectly. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and pride. This was not about revenge born from anger. This was justice, carefully planned, methodical, and complete. That night, I allowed myself a quiet moment alone. I reflected on the betrayal, the fear, the manipulation, and the emotional weight I had carried. All of it had led to this moment, where justice had finally been served. I realized that I had grown stronger through this ordeal. The woman who once trusted blindly was now someone who understood patience, strategy, and the power of evidence. The experience had been painful, but it had also been transformative. Matthew would now face the consequences of his actions. The man who had once tried to destroy my life was exposed, accountable, and powerless. And I, Samantha Reynolds, had reclaimed everything that was mine: my company, my dignity, and my peace. The day of the final hearing arrived, heavy with anticipation. I could feel my heart racing, a mixture of determination, relief, and quiet satisfaction. Weeks of planning, documenting, and strategizing had led to this moment. Matthew, once confident and controlling, now appeared tense, unsure, and clearly aware that his game was over. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers, staff, and witnesses were present. The judge reviewed every piece of evidence we had submitted, every act of manipulation and intimidation Matthew had committed. His arrogance, once so commanding, was now nowhere to be seen. As the hearing began, I remained calm. Every detail I had prepared was ready: emails, contracts, testimony, and documentation of every threat he had made. Matthew's defense team tried to argue, to twist words, to minimize his actions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified. Terrence spoke with clarity about the loyalty and trust Samantha had maintained in the company. Tom admitted to his mistake, acknowledging the manipulation Matthew had used to sway him. Even clients confirmed that Matthew had tried to create fear and doubt in order to benefit himself. The judge listened carefully, then delivered a verdict that filled me with a sense of finality. Matthew Black, the judge said firmly, your repeated attempts to manipulate, intimidate, and unlawfully interfere with Samantha Reynolds' business constitute criminal behavior. You are hereby sentenced to a term in prison for harassment, coercion, and interference with lawful business operations. I watched as Matthew's face went pale, his confidence shattered. For the first time, he truly understood the consequences of underestimating me. The man who had tried to take everything from me was now powerless, accountable, and facing the full weight of the law. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, not from revenge born of anger, but from justice that was finally complete. Every plan, every strategy, every patient move I had made had led to this moment. The storm he had tried to unleash on my life had turned back on him, exposing his actions for all to see. As I left the courtroom, I could feel the weight of months of fear, stress, and betrayal lifting. My staff gathered around me, their faces filled with relief and admiration. I realized then that this victory was not just mine, it was a testament to the power of patience, planning, and resilience. That night, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. I had reclaimed everything: my company, my dignity, my peace. The man who had once tried to destroy me was now facing justice, and I was free. I knew that life would continue, and there would be challenges ahead. But I had learned that no betrayal, no threat, no manipulation could overpower strength, strategy, and truth. I had survived, I had fought, and I had won. Matthew Black would serve his time. His power was gone. And I, Samantha Reynolds, had ensured that justice was delivered in the most powerful way possible. The courtroom was empty now, silent except for the faint echoes of the gavel from the past hearings. I sat quietly in my office, the city lights casting a soft glow across my desk. Months of betrayal, fear, and tension had led to this moment. Matthew Harris was behind bars, facing the consequences of his actions. My company was secure. My life finally felt mine again. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, the love that had once been real, the trust I had placed in him. I remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, the promises. And I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the threats, the relentless attempts to destroy me. Those memories were no longer wounds. They were lessons. I realized something important. Revenge is not about anger. Revenge is about justice. It is about ensuring that the harm caused cannot continue, that the wrongdoer faces accountability. Every step I had taken, every filing, every documented email, every strategy had been calculated not for cruelty, but for truth. Karen stopped by my office, smiling. "You did it, Samantha. You reclaimed everything." I smiled back, feeling the weight of relief and pride. "It was not easy," I said softly. "But I learned that strength comes from patience, preparation, and believing in yourself even when others try to destroy you." The city outside moved on, unaware of the storm that had raged behind closed doors. But I had changed. I was no longer just the woman Matthew had underestimated. I was someone who had survived betrayal, faced threats, and emerged stronger. Someone who understood the power of resilience, strategy, and justice. As I looked around my office, at the team that had stood by me, at the company I had built and protected, I felt a sense of peace. Matthew's punishment was not about revenge. It was about restoring balance. It was about showing that manipulation, coercion, and betrayal have consequences. I took a deep breath, letting the calm sink in. Life would continue, challenges would arise, but I was ready. The lessons I had learned, the strength I had gained, and the justice that had been served would guide me forward. The storm had passed. The keys to my own destiny were mine once again. And for the first time in months, I smiled without fear, without doubt, knowing that I had won,